Today, we're going to drink a bonfire. Hello, YouTube, and welcome to Happy Hour. Today, I have my first Islay Scotch review. It's kind of weird. I was looking back at my reviews. I don't have that many yet, but out of the maybe 10 or 12 that I've had or that I've done, none of them have been Islay Scotches, which is kind of interesting since I love Islay Scotches. I love the peat monsters, as they say. So today we've got an interesting one. We're not going to do kind of the standards. I'd say standards, maybe the most popular, the Lagavulin, or an Ardbeg, or Laphroaig, which are all three amazing. And they have many amazing versions within their brands from those three distilleries. But today we're going to do Port Charlotte 10 Heavily Peated Port Charlotte 10. So Port Charlotte is an offshoot, or at least maybe a line from Bruichladdich, which is another Islay distillery. I think Bruichladdich generally doesn't do a lot of peated whiskeys. Well, that sounds silly because they have Port Charlotte, which are all peated, and they do the Octomore as well. If you're familiar with Octomore, if you've heard that name, they're, I think, the highest peated whiskeys generally on the planet. Some of the Octomores are like 150 to 250 plus ppm, which is parts per million of phenolic parts per million, which is basically a good indicator of how peated the whiskey is going to be. I think that the majority of kind of the rest of the standard peated Islas, at least this guy is, I think, 40 parts per million. I think the Ardbegs are a little bit higher, generally in that 45, 50, 55 parts per million. And Laphroaig sits, I think, most of them around that 35, 40 as well. So I know it's not the number one indicator for understanding how peated a whiskey is going to be, but it's a pretty good number to give you an idea of whether it's going to be smoky as heck or not. So like I said, the Port Charlotte's 40. I've had a little bit out of it already. I've had 3 or 4 drams, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's heavily peated. It's not trying to hide itself, and I remember it being quite good. The thing that I generally have with, or at least historically that I've had with peated whiskeys, is my favorite thus far being Ardbeg Uigeadail. And what I liked about the Ardbeg Uigeadail specifically was I believe it's pretty heavily sherried. So I found it to be incredibly well balanced. Peat, if you've had any peated whiskeys, whether it's, these kind of heavily peated Islas, or even Highland Park. Highland Park does a good job as well. It's relatively lightly peated, but it can be difficult. I think it's difficult for the distilleries, and I know it's difficult for me to discern. Once you get that blast of peat, it can be a little bit difficult to get anything else. So for me, the ones that I've really found that I've enjoyed the most have been the ones that, if they're going to be heavily peated, there needs to be something else kind of counterbalancing that, so to make it interesting at least. And the Ardbeg Uigeadail up until this point has been my favorite because it is quite heavily sherry. There's a lot of sweet flavors and still kind of a punch in the face with a bonfire. So I found that very, very interesting and intriguing. This, from what I remember, wasn't quite, I don't believe it's sherried at all. It's quite light, but I do remember getting a few kind of fruitier notes. So let's dive in and taste it. Oh yeah, you know what's weird? I just found this out today when I grabbed the bottle. I know this is kind of nitpicking a little bit, but look at this cork. Like, I've only had, I don't know if you can see, basically just the neck of the bottle. And this cork is like loose to the point where when it's seated, it's actually not providing any corking, because the cork like passes through the neck. So in order for it to seat, I gotta like pull it up halfway. Not a big deal, but I guess it just makes me have to drink this one quicker. So maybe it's good marketing on their respect. All right, let's give her a go. So yeah, Port Charlotte's pretty interesting. Again, my research sucks.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
From what I gathered, I thought I heard Port Charlotte maybe being a much older distillery going way back. I could be completely wrong, but from what I understand now, it's Bruichladdich, and I don't know if it's kind of an offshoot distillery or if it's just an offshoot brand. But it's a cool bottle. It's really nicely presented. I kind of get the impression that it's really maybe more Bruichladdich kind of peated line, where their other scotches maybe aren't quite as peated. But again, I could be talking out of my ass, and it wouldn't be the first time. So anyways, onto the whiskey. So it's pretty light in color. There's I don't think a lot of sherry. I don't think there's any sherry cask going on here. I think it's probably bourbon and then just their peat. I did read that it's pretty organic. They kind of we're not maybe not organic, but locally sourced barley, and it's kind of a craft, dare I say, craft style whiskey. I got that impression when I remember seeing this on their website that it's kind of a smaller crew and they take pride in it and really wanted to make something that was kind of different and had a feel, at least, whether hopefully a taste as well, that was kind of small batch, kind of homegrown, and maybe a little unique. So on the nose, yeah. So okay, so I haven't had any whiskey today, and I haven't any peated whiskey, and yeah, it smells like a bonfire, which can be a little bit off-putting if you're not used to Isla's or heavily peated whiskey, I guess in general. But I found that once you kind of let it linger a little bit and go back a few times, it starts to tone down, and you start to get some other notes, hopefully. So I'm going to give it a minute to kind of open up and breathe and maybe get my nose used to it. Yeah, so it is definitely quite peated. It's up there, at least, from what I remember, an Ardbeg 10 or a Lafroig 10. It's that initial just punch in the face, like you got hit in the head with a stick that's on fire, but in a good way. All right, so now I'm kind of getting some other notes past the peat. I'm getting past the smoke. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm actually kind of getting. So this is a 10-year-old. It's a relatively young whiskey. Yeah, relatively young. 10-year-old, pretty decent. I can smell that almost. I can smell a little bit of fruit, like the kind of the Glenlivet, that kind of Glenlivet, Glenmorangie fruit, kind of a little bit of the apples. Again, I need to go back more than I would normally on a non-peated whiskey, because it's like you got to kind of fight your way through a paper bag a little bit, or at least I do. Yeah, it starts to mellow down. I can actually smell kind of barley, kind of wheat and barley a little bit. Maybe like a sweet malt. I can smell like a sweeted malt, or sweeted malt, like a kind of a sugary, malty cookie kind of note, maybe like a heather even. But yeah, I get some higher end fruits, like kind of the apples and maybe a little bit of citrus. It's quite nice, actually. Again, it's pretty. That on the nose seems relatively well rounded. I have had a few of the Islay whiskeys Islay whiskeys that I just haven't been able to. I enjoy them because I do like the peat. I like that crazy smoky flavor for whatever reason. I'm a nut, I guess, but I've had a few that there's nothing really past that. It's just a kind of a woof. That's a smoky. That's a bonfire. But yeah, on this one, I'm getting some of the fruits and a little bit of malt, and like I said, it's kind of a barley, sweet barley cookie. All right, let's give it a taste. Hmm. Ah, it's good. So that peat doesn't go away on the palate. It's definitely there right away. Now I didn't mention, this is also, I think, 50%. Yeah, so this is a 50% ABV, which is pretty high, which is actually quite nice. I think it gives you some flexibility. You can see I've got a little bit of water here. I am going to add a few drops of water just to see what it does to it in a minute. But yeah, so it's a high ABV. It actually doesn't quite, other than that initial kick of peat, the aftertaste or the mid palate and afterwards, I'm definitely getting some of that fruit, kind of Glenlivet-y. It's very oily, which is what I like about a lot of the Islay whiskeys. They have that kind of oily, thick aftertaste, but there's a sweetness here. It is very peaty. You get that salty briny oil, and a little bit of that fruit and malt come through. It's quite nice. So the first sip was a little bit sharper, probably because of the 50% alcohol. The second, it doesn't drink as hot as it is, which is, I think, the whiskeys that I've had that are higher ABV that don't drink as hot as they should, I've found that I tend to enjoy more. Maybe just because they're balanced better. Um, but yeah, that's good. Let's add a couple drops of water. 4 or 5 drops of water. And I got these cool little Karen Craft bamboo lids, I guess, for Glencairn glasses. They're actually got a little silicone seal as well. So they're not quite like toppers. Well, I guess you could use it as a topper too, but I thought these were really cool because they got a little suction, or sorry, a little seal where it can actually kind of leak proof. Is it leak proof? Yeah, it's leak proof. So I thought that was kind of cool. I could, you know, if I ever don't finish a whiskey, I can put one of these little toppers in and save it for later.
What? What the fuck?
And then as soon as I said those words out of my mouth, I thought that was maybe the stupidest thing I've ever said in my entire life. Because why the hell would I not finish my glass of whiskey? So I don't know. But anyways, so I got them. I'll use them as toppers or lids to keep the glorious scent in. So we're going to give that a second, and I'll come back and we'll go again. All right. So I just let it sit for a few seconds. I'm sure you didn't want to watch me sit here. It's like watching grass grow. So I've added like 5 or 6 drops of water in here. Oh, okay. It's something different. Give me a second to figure out what it is. I get a little more of the citrusy notes now. Kind of a little more, maybe a little orange. A little bit of that lemon kind of coming through. So I get fruits. Now I've also noticed with Islay whiskeys, with heavily peated whiskeys, again, after like 2, 3, 4 sips, and even more so after a half a bottle in a night, the peat starts to go away. Like I've actually gone through, you know, had some sessions where I've been, you know, 4 or 5 drams deep and I forgot I was drinking an Islay whiskey for a minute. So it definitely kind of, you get used to it, I guess is the best, simplest way of saying it. Yeah, I can actually kind of smell the oiliness, the kind of salty, briny, oily, a little bit of the fruits in there. Ah, it smells good. Let's see what we taste. I don't know that I taste much different than the last one, other than it has maybe taken the edges off of the, again, I didn't add that much water, so it's not like we knocked this down by 5% ABV or anything, but it does tone it down a little bit. It takes the kind of the rough, spiky edges off the edges a bit. Yeah, I would recommend, I would probably drink this now, moving forward. I'm going to remember this, and definitely add a few drops of water. I think it just kind of rounds it out a little bit and makes it a little more enjoyable. So yeah, that's a good one. Other than the cork, which is driving me crazy. Again, not a big deal, but whatever. I would recommend this. So the thing with Islay whiskeys, if you have had them before, then this you obviously know this already, but if you haven't tried them and you're interested, if you're just maybe getting into scotches or whiskeys in general, these heavily peated whiskeys, the Port Charlottes and like I mentioned before, the Ardbegs and the Lafroigs, they can be a bit of a rude awakening. If you've had the Glenmorangies and the Glenlivets and the whatever Highlands and Speysides, there's obviously quite a few differences between a lot of those whiskeys. But once you jump over to this little island in particular, it's a whole new ball of wax. So it can be a little bit of a shock to the system when you first try these. I know some people that I've seen try an Islay whiskey, and after the smell, but even more specifically after the first taste, it's kind of like, what the f was that? And I get that, because it's you're not expecting it. Most people don't drink smoky things. For me, I think I kind of had a love affair. I fell in love after the first time I tried one, and I had more of a, ooh, what the f is that? Right? So, a kind of a similar reaction. Wow, this is totally different. I wasn't expecting this. What's happening here? But I had a positive turn. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed them, and I enjoyed kind of branching out and exploring some new ones. So don't be scared of it. Just a bottle of whiskey. Just got some smoke and some weird flavors in it. But if you haven't tried it, I would give this guy in particular, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I'd put it up there. I don't know if I'd put it up there with the Oogdal specifically. About a bottle of Lafroig 18 when they were making that, and that was friggin' fantastic as well. But price point here in Chicago, I believe this is like $59.99, $60. So for a 50% ABV, a 10-year-old peated whiskey, I think that's pretty fair. Lafroig 10 and Ardbeg 10 are both in that price range too, in that kind of $50, $55, $60 price range. So yeah, and even more specifically, if you've tried the Ardbeg 10 and the Lafroig 10, I think you'd like this. I think it adds a little bit of a dimension that's different than those two. So I'd certainly recommend picking it up and having a bottle at $60. I think it's a pretty fair price. So, all right. Thanks guys for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed the review. If you did, please click the thumbs up, like button, and if you'd like to subscribe to see what other videos we got coming down the pipe, I'd appreciate that as well. Cheers. See you next time.